Today on the Perception and Action podcast, a look at a recent study that addresses a question I get quite often. Do the basic principles and finding of motor learning research, in this case those proposed by the optimal theory, still hold when we're dealing with highly skilled athletes as opposed to novices? So it's time for a call to action. Hi, this is Rob Gray from Arizona State University. I've been on a now over 25-year journey as a researcher, professor, and high-performance consultant to understand how we acquire and adapt our perceptual motor skills. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. Now on to the show. Hi everyone, this is Rob Gray from ASU and the Perception Action podcast, back with another article review. In this paper, this episode, what I want to do is talk about a paper that addresses a question I get asked a lot, right? Obviously, one of my other main gigs, I work with very high-level professional baseball players. So I get asked, do the kind of classic motor learning effects we talk about, right? The benefits of external focus of attention, the variability, the role of variability of practice, the role of choice and autonomy in practice. Do these things really still apply when you get to an elite athlete level? Or are they really more just for novices, right? Are they going to really mostly have their effect on novices? And, this is built up from the study fact that most of the studies we do are not on truly elite athletes, right? Although there are some on focus of attention, right? So this is, I think, is a fair question. So in today's episode, what I want to do is focus on a study that's looking at testing the predictions of optimal theory for basketball shooters, and particularly looking at experienced athletes instead of novices. Okay, so for those that don't know, optimal theory is theory proposed by Gabby Wolf and Rebecca Lufwade. I have a whole episode interviewing them. You can go back and find if you're interested in. But it basically talks about optimal performance it stands for optimal performance through intrinsic motivation and attention for learning. Really, learning can be influenced by two factors, right? So enhanced expectancy and autonomy support. So expectancy is, it's feeling like you're going to be successful. That was manipulated through illusions and things like that in the golf studies. Autonomy support, letting you have some choice in the matter, controlling your own practice. And then the third component is attentional, right? Obviously, Gabby's long history of work on external focus of attention, right? So what they're proposing in these series is these things have their own independent contributions, right? You learn better with enhanced expectancy, with more choice and autonomy, and with external focus, but they also have additive effects, right? When you have two of the things together, it's going to give you a bigger effect than when one alone, okay? And then this paper, they start by reviewing all the different, research on it. And they point out there's kind of a lack of research on more skilled populations of athletes. Most of it's on novices showing these benefits. So they're addressing the very question, as I mentioned, that I get asked a lot. So they're going to look at how autonomy support, they're going to let people control and have some choice over their practice, and attentional focus can interact to affect training of free throws in basketball, okay? Interestingly, they have a kind of a twist a bit on the focus part. They're going to include an internal condition, an external condition, a control condition, like most studies in this area. But they're also going to add a holistic condition. A holistic focus of attention is one of my favorite tools that I've talked a little bit about on the podcast here and there. But a holistic focus of attention is where you get an athlete to focus on kind of the overall quality of a movement. So focus on how smooth that movement was, right? So it's instead of focusing on the outcome or focusing on internally on how the outcome is generated, it's kind of a totally different focus, okay? And they're hypothesizing that having self-control practice would lead to greater free-throw accuracy. So what they're doing in this case, they're giving athletes choice over the color of the ball they use, right? And they're having the classic manipulation where you have a yoke group that for each one that chooses a certain color, someone in the opposite group just gets assigned that color, okay? They're talking about they predicted external attention and holistic attention would both be better than internal or control. And then the fact that they predicted that you get this combo, this additive effect that's predicted in optimal theory, right? That's what they're trying to achieve in this study in the main goals. So they had 56 participants, 28 men, 28 women. They're sampled for people who had played basketball for 10 years and then were present in the first division adult league. So they're experienced. Of course, we're still not even close. We're not close to talking about elite athletes, but obviously more experienced than is used in most studies. Like a lot of basketball studies I've talked about in the podcast, they use this scoring system. So instead of just having a ball go in or not, which is not sensitive enough, they talked about swish being 5 points, a ball hitting the rim and going in for 4 points. Ball hits the rim, you get 3. It hits the backboard but doesn't go in. Okay. And then all the way down to 0 if you get a complete air ball, right? So they have a different scoring from 0 to 5 based on how close the ball is to going in. Okay, so that's the basic design. They did that before and after the manipulations. So they start off by splitting those 56 participants in 2 groups, either self-controlled or yoked. The self-control group got to choose, as I mentioned, the color of the ball was either red, green, or blue they practiced with. The yoke group got assigned the same ball color as someone else in the other group, right? And then within each of those groups, there, so for those in the stats minded, the choice or the choice or autonomy was a between subjects factor. So half did self-controlled, half did yoked. Then within that, there was a within subject factor of attentional conditions. So everyone participated in all 4 of the attentional conditions: external, internal, holistic, and control. Okay, and obviously in separate blocks. So that's the basic design, very basic design. Here's the specifics of the procedure. In internal focus, they were given the instruction: as you try to have your best shot, try to mentally focus on opening your elbow during the free throw shot, right? So focusing on the technique, focusing internally on your body, classic manipulation. Number 2, external was: as you try to have your best shot, try to focus on mentally the basket and the ball trajectory during the throw. So focusing on the outcome, the effect your movement is having on the movement of the ball, which is a classic external focus. The holistic focus, they're told instructed to, as you try to have your best shot, try to mentally focus on the fluidity of the whole action during the throw. So they are focusing, with a holistic focus, they are focusing on their own movement, but not the specific details of it, what their arm is doing or what their wrist is doing. They're focusing on kind of the overall quality. Sometimes you get to focus on the speed, the fluidity. There's lots of different ways to do holistic focus. I've done a couple episodes if you're interested. Have a look back at those. And then they had a control condition where they just tried to have your best shot. So kind of a very standard design. They did 20 free throws under each of the attentional focus conditions. So that was 80. And there was 5 minutes between. And they were randomized, counterbalanced across groups. So it's a good design. They also used the standard manipulation check where asked people afterwards how much they complied with the instructions, which is, I've never been a huge fan. I've always been a dual task man myself for manipulating attention, because I think it's more direct and manipulation checks. I think it's better than nothing, but there's some doubt whether you're actually getting people to do what you say. But anyway, that was what was done. Okay, so that's the basic procedure. The results. So here are the results, the free throw accuracy in terms of points. So they two basic overall effects. One is overall, you perform better in the self-control condition when you got to choose the ball color versus the O condition. And so that was the effect of this choice. There was also overall effect of attention, right? So the external and holistic groups did better than the control and internal groups. As predicted, there was no difference between the external and holistic, right? So self-control, self-control outperformed a yoke group, regardless for all instructions overall. Both external and holistic was better than internal and control, okay? The only thing they didn't really find an evidence of any kind of additivity in the effects, right? So having if we go back to the graph, right, having a self-controlled external was not better than, was marginally, self-controlled holistic was not better than a yoke consistent. Self-controlled external was not significantly different than a self-controlled. So when they did those conditions, kind of pairwise conditions within specific conditions, they didn't find an evidence of adding external and choice was more than greater than doing each independently alone. So they give kind of partial support to the optimal conditions. So they partially support the benefits of the optimal the things. They also further show the benefits of beyond just what I think you can think of a holistic as kind of an external focus. They show the benefits of that focus. So I think that which supports previous research. So they partially support optimal theory. They show for skilled basketball players that there was no additive effect. It suggests the benefits of using autonomy support through choice and either external or holistic focus of attention to improve motor performance and learning. Here, this is not really looking at learning. They didn't train people in these conditions and measure the change. It was only the performance in this test, right? So I said pre and post earlier. There was no pre and post because they just measure the performance shooting under different conditions. So it was more a performance test than a learning test. Okay, so I think that's an interesting study, and it kind of partially addresses the question I raised at the start. Do these effects work? For me, I find as I go higher up, I think there's more subtlety needed in these decisions. I also find the idea of choice. I think, elite athletes are one of the ones I work with. Having a completely irrelevant choice like ball color, I think I personally don't see much gain in that, much benefit of that. I think they can see through that. Obviously, we let them choose to hit with whatever bat they want, what other color. I think that's more important than making them choose what ball do you want to throw, right? What I've been really using, what I've been really moving towards is I like to give athletes some choice that's relevant, right? So what drill are you going to do next, right? So it's relevant, not just some irrelevant choice like the color of the bat or the ball or whatever. And the expression I've been using a lot is what is called constrained choice, right? So, I think in when you're working with elite athletes, and I've talked about, we really need deliberate, targeted, individualized training. If you just let them do whatever they want for a session, there can be some benefits to that. But in general, they're not going to choose one of those things on their own very often. They're going to choose something that makes them confident, makes them feel good, which there's room for that. But I think it's better to say, okay, here are 3 possibilities for what we're going to do in this next block of session. Pick one, right? It gives them the choice, but also you can focus it on something you want them to work on. And the use of focus of attention cues, I think this holistic is showing again. I think, as you get to a higher level and you're trying to get optimized performance, I think we're seeing more individualized differences of what people need to work on and what they're working on. Sometimes, we need to, we're keeping, we're training people and we need to direct them to how a ball feels in their hands, right? How do we do that without talking about their hands, right? As I mentioned in my last book, right? Jumping through hurdles to try to make an obvious situation where you need something internal, making it external seems to be silly to me. I'd much rather make sure the last thing they think about is external. So for me, I do think the principles of motor learning apply, right? Variability I've talked about before. Instead of broad variations in the task, focusing it more around what the athlete needs to work on, the pitches they have trouble hitting, for example, focus variability, instead of having broad variations. So I think for me, the rules still apply. You're just using them differently in terms of choice and autonomy and in terms of attentional focus. But I think this is a good study showing some of these effects. The benefits still exist for people that are already pretty good basketball players. Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at ShakyWeights. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including a monthly coaches meetup, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep them coupled. Gone through St. Louis.